Our story begins on a rainy day in this beautiful castle. Within the castle walls, in one of its many rooms, lay a small baby. We also see a blond man looking at the child with disdain. The infant had done nothing wrong. This man is his father, and he's now saying this disgusting thing was born. The poor child's misfortune was being born on the same day as Kajin, the child blessed by the sword god, Kisha. He was born with a blessed body and talent to match. His mother now holds the child, lamenting that this child wasn't the one embraced by such fortune. The reason for all this discussion is because this little baby was born without a right arm. Every night, his mother whispers in his ear, "My little baby, could you just die already?" The child feels terribly sorry, but he doesn't want to die. Even in his mother's womb, he could hear his father say, "This child is our hope." His father could never defeat his older brother. This child must be better than his brother's son. His father wanted him to defeat Kajin, but he was born without an arm and without the blessing of God. It was a disgrace, shattering his father's dreams for his birth. That's why he's now in the garden. We can see a child surrounded by maids. This is the blessed little Kajin. The maids are vying for the toddler's smile. His mother watches all of this from afar, noticing that Kajin has already begun to walk. She wonders why her child is so slow. We can also see that when the toddler finally stands up, no maids helped him. He takes his first step. His mother is disappointed because, at that point, Kajin was already able to hold a sword. The first time the child held a sword, his mother said Kajin already knew mana and had begun training in swordsmanship. "If only my son could be like Kajin, I would be so much happier." At some point in his journey, Kajin became an object of both his admiration and envy. So, when he turned 7, he was sent to become one of Kajin's attendants. To those looking in from the outside, he was seen as someone sent to help and support Kajin as a cousin or something similar. However, the truth was his parents sold him for 300,000 ren. And the most unexpected thing happened to little, armless Davin. Kajin despised him with all his heart, frequently tormenting him. Simply because Kajin didn't like him, Davin became his punching bag. He had to hold back his tears. It wasn't because it hurt, but simply because he saw several adults passing by, ignoring the situation. Davin's uncle was considered a remarkable man, but at some point, he left home and never returned. Consequently, there was no one to control Kajin, so he grew up to be a bully. After a heated training battle with one of his subordinate boys, the boy's sword broke, and he ultimately conceded defeat. Exceptional talent and the sword god's blessing were like poison to Kajin. He showed no mercy and hit his subordinate, saying, "Did you think I would stop just because you lost?" He watched his subordinate's training, then called for the next sparring partner. This time, he gestured towards the now older Davin. Davin, envious of Kajin's natural talent and strength, seethed inwardly, determined to become stronger himself. The clash of swords was inevitable, continuing until Kajin snapped at him to stop staring. Then, with a surge of power, Kajin slammed Davin against one of the castle pillars, sneering, "How dare a pathetic, armless failure like you look at me that way?" Returning to where Davin lay crumpled, Kajin continued his tirade. "Did you really think you could beat me with mere effort?" He spat. "Someone like you could train for a lifetime and still never catch up to me." He struck Davin again, but the younger man's resolve remained unbroken. He still yearned to defeat Kajin. Even knowing his dream was likely unattainable through hard work alone, Davin persisted. Meanwhile, Kajin grew complacent in his training. As he aged, he indulged in alcohol and worse. Despite his self-destructive habits, Kajin remained unbeatable. It was a classic tale of lazy genius versus tireless worker. But this dynamic wouldn't last forever. Years later, another tournament arrived. The matchup, Kajin versus Davin, both now grown men. Kajin swung his sword with a furious roar, the force of the blow sending Davin flying. Refusing to be defeated, Davin slammed his own sword into the ground with all his might. Kajin recognized the power behind the attack, a calculated distraction. It was a feint designed to create an opening for a surprise attack. Kajin, enraged, took the bait. Both men unleashed the full extent of their power, their swords clashing in a blinding explosion. A hush fell over the stunned crowd. Then, pandemonium erupted. The one-armed Davin had defeated the soaring storm that was Kajin. Davin's record against Kajin had been a dismal 0 wins, 21 losses, and 21 ties. But now, at 29 years old, he had finally triumphed. He'd been mocked and ridiculed, told to give up, dismissed as an idiot from a no-name town. Yet, he had persevered and achieved the impossible. The crowd roared its approval for the one-armed victor. Davin looked down at Kajin. How long did you think you could remain on top? He challenged. Kajin's mind reeled. He couldn't comprehend losing to someone he considered worthless like Davin. Davin, sensing his opponent's disbelief, echoed the taunts that had haunted him his entire life. If my son were Kajin, if Kajin were my son, if the protagonist were Kajin, Davin recited. He said he wouldn't have lived a life like this. Kajin's fury ignited, but Davin continued, his voice rising. If you were truly Kajin, you wouldn't waste your life on alcohol and those things. You would have lived a more meaningful life instead of simply trampling on the weak. He turned, a triumphant smile playing on his lips. I finally won. He breathed, then his eyes widened in shock. Kajin, in a cowardly act, had driven his sword through Davin's back. A wave of despair washed over the arena. Kajin had stabbed Davin in the back. The narrator could only think of him as a bastard, even to the very end. Blinded by rage, Kajin hadn't hesitated. As Davin's lifeblood drained away, he felt no anger. He had finally defeated his rival, but it seemed he wouldn't survive. He realized he'd been struck by the magic sword of the infamous three-eyed family. He believed he would only die if Saint Lyra didn't appear. Then, with a terrifying expression, he declared that Kajin would be remembered in history as a failure. Sometime later, in a place that resembled a prison, it all came to an end. Davin could be seen bound, and he asked if this was hell. A giant before him laughed, calling him a lucky one. Who would have thought the miraculous Saint Lyra would appear in the arena? Confusion clouded Davin's mind, but the executioner explained that, like a true saint, she had healed him, despite his filth and stench. Davin finally understood how he had survived, though the feeling of his body being broken remained. Then, the executioner abruptly asked if he had truly made a pact with a demon. The question startled Davin. The man continued, saying it was the only way a loser like him could have defeated Kajin. He even claimed Davin's parents had confessed to it, so there was no point in denying it. The mention of his parents made Davin realize it was something they were indeed capable of. He asked, with a hint of mockery, if that was truly the case. The man replied that offerings and vials of Davin's blood, used for the pact, had been found in his home. He reiterated the discovery of the offerings and vials in Davin's home, used to forge the demonic pact. He declared Davin a demon who had sacrificed 300 innocent children for power, pointing at him and claiming that young Master Kajin had stabbed him because he was a demon and to protect the honor of the Samyang family. A bitter laugh escaped Davin's lips. He understood. He could defeat Kajin, but he could never stand against the Samyang family. The guards declared that Davin had tarnished the family's honor and would be sealed of his magic, spending the rest of his life in prison. A soldier spat curses at him, condemning him to eternal suffering. And so, the tendons in his legs and arm were severed, his magic bound by several chains, and he was thrown into the darkness of the prison. With the clang of the iron bars and the sudden influx of light, he realized Kajin had finally come to see him. The boy, wearing a malicious smile, remarked that Davin looked well. He, Kajin, had become the Sword Emperor, praised as a diligent genius. He thanked Davin, attributing his success to the loser. After Kajin's taunts and departure, Davin's meager rations were further reduced. Starving, coughing up blood, he thought that if he were to die, he at least wanted to die with honor. He should have died in the arena that day. Now, lying on the cold floor, everything was growing numb. Would things have been different if he hadn't been born with only one arm? If he had been a direct descendant? If he had received the blessing of the sword god, Kesha, would his life truly have been different? Would he have known the love and support of his family? He didn't want to die. He desperately wanted to live. And then, the world seemed to stop. Suddenly, he was jolted awake by the scolding voice of an adult. The only thing he was aware of was the searing pain. Pain in his right arm. In that moment, he couldn't tell if it was all a dream, but the pain felt undeniably real. Looking at the man reprimanding him, Vincent knew he was an adult from the main branch of the family, though he couldn't understand how he knew. He also realized the man was calling him Vincent, and soon his mind flooded with memories. Even so, this didn't feel like a nightmare. Nothing could be worse than that filthy prison. Was this a dream where he had his right arm back? Was this a gift given to him before his death? The man was furious, demanding to know how much longer Vincent intended to ignore him. Realizing the man was trying to harm him with magic, Vincent quickly reacted, using a technique to deflect the attack. It was a simple maneuver meant only to put physical distance between himself and his opponent. He noticed the man had been thrown back several feet, which shouldn't have happened. Stunned by the force of the repulse, Vincent questioned what kind of body he now possessed. He quickly apologized, claiming his hand had slipped. The man didn't want his apologies, calling him a reckless brat. He stood up, fuming, declaring that Vincent was only acting this way because he came from the main family. Even though completely enraged, the man proclaimed his son would crush him mercilessly. Anita would be the first of the branch family to crush the main family. Vincent quickly likened this man to his previous father, who had pinned all his dreams on his son because he himself couldn't achieve them. As he finally stormed off, the man vowed he wouldn't forget today's arrogance and disrespect, telling Vincent to just wait for the true sword tournament. Left alone, after a while, Vincent sat down, wondering if this truly wasn't a dream. Suddenly, new memories began to surface in his mind. He remembered his mother dying shortly after his birth, and his father not caring for him at all. All the other children treated him, Vincent the Seventh, like a scapegoat for the 8 children of the renowned sword clan. He was so cowardly that even after being beaten by the youngest girl in the family, he would cower and cry in his room. Furthermore, he was constantly hounded by the branch families who yearned to surpass the main family. He wanted to surpass the main family. Davin of the Simon clan, the one-armed boy, had become Vincent, the useless boy of the Adenka clan. He quickly began to question if this was reincarnation. Knowing nothing for certain, he forced his way into the library and found a diary. Within its pages were entries where the previous owner of this body demeaned himself. According to the diary, his self-esteem was so low that he eventually gave up on everything. This led Vincent to believe that a god had answered their prayers. In his final moments, Davin had truly wanted to live, while Vincent had constantly wished for death. Essentially, the one who wanted to die was gone, and the one who wanted to live was revived. Then, a voice suddenly echoed from seemingly nowhere, asking him if he truly believed something so absurd. Vincent quickly spun around, searching for the source of the voice, wondering if someone was in the room with him and who they were. The voice simply stated that he was either naive or an idiot. It questioned why he was thinking so much, and then claimed to be the original owner of this body. Panicked, Vincent asked if he truly was the original owner, the one called Vincent, acknowledging the purple-eyed being before him. The being confirmed he was correct. He explained his original name was Julian, but having given his body away, he now had no name and requested to be called simply Julian. Vincent, struggling to grasp the situation, asked if that meant he hadn't died, questioning how such a thing was possible. Julian simply stated it was a revelation, a gift from the gods bestowed upon humans blessed at birth. Quickly piecing things together, Vincent pointed at Julian and asked if he was now a god. Julian confirmed this, admitting he was a lesser god. He explained he had intended to summon a spirit god, but had brought Vincent instead. To become a true god, not a lesser one like himself, Julian needed to achieve countless feats, which they called summonings. Only upon completing these summonings could he be considered a true god. Vincent stated he understood Julian's predicament, but wasn't interested in his achievements. He added that if everything Julian said was true, he had been given a new life and intended to live it, meaning he couldn't help Julian fulfill his aspirations. Julian acknowledged this, stating that Vincent's desire for life was the result of Julian giving up his own. However, his spiritual energy was incredibly low, and if it faded completely, this body would die. Vincent, caught off guard, asked if that was meant to be a threat. Touching his chest, he remarked that for someone facing such an untimely demise, he felt remarkably healthy. Suddenly, everything shook. Vincent broke out in a cold sweat, having just offended the god before him. As he finally collapsed to the ground, Julian asked if he understood now, calling Vincent naive. He then declared he would show Vincent all of his true memories, as a bolt of lightning struck Vincent's chest. Overwhelmed by Julian's memories, Vincent understood what had happened. Everyone called him trash, an idiot, and told him to grovel at their feet. But his expression wasn't that of someone recently beaten. He wasn't consumed by despair as he played the coward. He was laying the groundwork for his revenge. Incredulous, Vincent wondered if this was truly the mind of a 13-year-old. He even questioned what kind of world he had ended up in. With a sardonic smile, Julian asked how his flawless acting was. He had to escape his family surveillance, and the subjects he wanted to learn were considered apostle level. Even with all this information, Vincent remained unmoved. Then, Julian said, "Since that's the case, then do you know about the great demon Davin and the hero king Kajin?" It seemed he had finally caught Vincent's attention. He erupted in fury, demanding to know how Julian knew about that. It was something that happened 500 years ago. A one-armed swordsman named Davin escaped from the Samyang prison, making a pact with a demon. He devoured thousands of lives to grow stronger. It is said that he killed over 10,000 people in the process, which is why he is remembered by history as a great demon. Vincent asked Davin, who was from 500 years ago, if that meant he was now 500 years ahead of his time. None of it made any sense, and neither did the fact that people claimed Davin and Kajin were the same bloodline as the Three-Eyed Clan. Besides, he clearly remembered dying in prison 500 years ago. The Three-Eyed Clan abandoned the one-armed swordsman and chose the Storm Sword, while the one-armed swordsman died alone. The Storm Sword became the Sword Emperor, but to make up a story to talk about the great demon and the hero king, they must have gotten something wrong. Vincent, completely enraged, pounded the ground, cursing the damned Three-Eyed Clan. Julian started to laugh, saying that the hero king, Kajin, was a great friend, that he truly loved the great demon, and asked wasn't it romantic. Vincent, utterly furious, told him to stop the madness. Julian, perplexed, asked why he was so worked up, to which he replied that it was because the whole story was fabricated. All of this led him to ask if he was from that era. Answering yes, Julian mocked him again, saying he must be very old, and called the old man not to get angry, because regardless, the story was just a combination of descriptions left by the victors. This led Vincent to ask, with a 13-year-old speaking like this, what had the world become? Seeing no way out, he asked Julian to continue the story. The king, swallowing his tears, cooperated with the greatest hero of that era, his best friend and the Sun Sword Emperor, all to defeat the great demon, Davin. Unsure who the Sun Sword Emperor was, he inquired about the individual, and Julian was surprised he didn't know Arslan, the ancestor of the Adenka clan, until he finally remembered the kid named Arslan, saying he was incredibly arrogant, and asked if he really became the first patriarch of the Adenka clan. Back then, that boy came to him, saying he admired him greatly, and when he grew up, he wanted to be just like him. Although that was when the kid was still young. He was still a friend and disciple he taught alone. Back then, Arslan visited him several times during his imprisonment. He said he hadn't committed any crime, and authority could never overcome the truth. He swore that no matter how long it took, he would restore Davin's honor. After the boy said those things to him, he never saw him again. Julian said that he was the first patriarch of the Adenka clan and left them with a lifelong mission, which was related to his conquest. The conquest to overcome the Three-Eyed Clan and face the truth. Understanding the whole situation, he questioned if this was just a coincidence. But he opened his eyes, saying that it wasn't just a coincidence. Although he didn't know everything, he knew one thing. Our son, Vok, left the Vo clan and created the Adenka clan to face the truth. Adenka, a new clan, was created to restore Davin's honor. In short, it was because of fate that he was born into our son's clan. Vincent quickly inquired if he truly could become a god if he completed the objective. Julian affirmed this, adding that when he ascended to true godhood, he would even be able to bestow incredible blessings upon him. According to Julian, it was a mutually beneficial agreement. Vincent expressed his gratitude to Arslan, declaring that he would inherit the mission left by his friend and would triumph over the Samyang family. He would forever remain a step ahead of the family that betrayed him, becoming a member of this family known as the Adenka clan, now outside the castle. Julian asked where the old man was going, which irritated him, prompting him to retort, "Didn't I tell you not to call me old man anymore?" The lesser god attempted to explain that if he was from 500 years ago, he would certainly be an old man. This prompted Vincent to feign amnesia, claiming Julian would have to explain everything again as he was just an old man. Julian quickly began calling him by the name Davin, stating he wouldn't call him old man anymore, until they heard someone shout to begin training. Two swords seemed to clash with mana. Vincent wondered what kind of martial arts the people of that era used, imagining how much they must have evolved after 500 years. He pondered how powerful Kajin's descendants must have become. But suddenly, Vincent felt his body grow heavy, and slowly, he began to lose consciousness. Finally, he collapsed onto the ground. He understood that this child's body was frail, as he fainted easily. Furthermore, this body was in such poor condition that if he didn't use mana to control it, he wouldn't be able to live a normal life. Until suddenly, he was startled by a surge of mana. He quickly began screaming Julian's name, telling him to come to him quickly. It seemed the lesser god was sleeping and asked why he was calling. Vincent asked why he hadn't learned swordsmanship with this body before. The boy, somewhat bewildered by the situation, said he had a disability that prevented him from learning. Frustrated, he demanded to know why, and the boy explained that he was simply born that way. Vincent, utterly exasperated, exclaimed that he had a celestial exoskeleton. So why hadn't he learned swordsmanship before? The lesser god, unaware of what that was, began to ask why the fuss, stating it was because you could store mana anywhere in the body. The lesser god still didn't quite grasp the situation, so Vincent told him to listen carefully. He explained that martial artists needed to use mana to possess superhuman strength beyond ordinary people. The mana that creates miracles is usually stored in a person's heart, but having a celestial exoskeleton meant that in addition to storing mana in the heart, you could also store mana in your bones. This meant you would be able to use mana infinitely. Vincent said he probably still didn't understand the significance of this, so he brought up Kajin, the one they all called the Hero King, who also had a celestial exoskeleton. It was ironic, he mused, that he was reincarnated in the image of Kajin, the very person who ended his previous life. But now, 500 years later, this world was stranger than he could have imagined. The lesser god said he would teach him how to connect his imagery with his heart. It's like an imaginary warehouse, Julian explained, referring to the concept of mana storage. Vincent, bewildered, questioned, "Don't you store mana in your heart anymore?" The lesser god, Julian, looked at him blankly. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "The first Adenka, Falk," he continued, had this amazing meditation technique to store mana within his own heart. Julian, struggling to explain the current practices to this man out of time, went on, "These days, we store mana in imagery. Each image is called a star. The number of stars you can use represents your strength as a warrior." He added, "It's been so long since we moved away from storing mana physically in the body. I don't even think there are any records of it anymore." Listening to this, Vincent understood. This method was created to avoid the risks associated with storing mana in the heart. In the past, over half of the warriors died from storing mana in their hearts. They exploded, but that didn't apply to him. "I fill my heart with mana," Vincent stated matter-of-factly. Julian's eyes widened. "Are you actually storing mana in your heart?" he exclaimed. Vincent waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry, my heart is quite sturdy." A grin spread across his face. "If I want to be called a true warrior," he declared, "I have to at least take this risk." Julian suddenly interjected, "You're letting the mana spread. The sequence is all wrong. Don't you know the circuit formula?" he demanded. Vincent frowned. "You're too loud," he complained. "Is there really a formula?" "Of course there's a formula," Julian exclaimed, aghast. Vincent shrugged. "In my time," he said, "we just focused on feeling to do it. When it went wrong," he continued, a hint of dark amusement in his voice, "those mana circuits would get twisted and eventually explode. At least half of them would." Julian's voice was barely a whisper. "People actually died." In other words, Vincent replied, "At least half survived. Aren't those good odds?" he asked with a smirk. Julian was furious. "Don't be so careless just because it's not your own body," he snapped. This prompted Vincent to raise an eyebrow. "Why are you so concerned about my treatment of your precious body?" Julian floundered for a moment, then explained, "This body, its heart and mana circuits are incredibly strong. If it had received proper training from a young age, it would have been a success. Physique is a necessary structure to contain mana, and it also requires mana." At this rate, Julian continued, his voice grim, "Vincent Adenka's body will die before even reaching adulthood." He paused, then added, "According to my calculations, meditation can prevent it from getting worse. but it's limited. He probably only has 10 years left. But then, a flicker of determination entered his eyes. But 10 years is enough. Enough for the Storm Sword to become the Sword Emperor. Enough for the armless Davin to be forgotten by the world. The same amount of time it took for Davin to starve to death in an underground prison cell. The thought of those 10 years, terrifying and absurdly long, hung heavy in the air. The silence was broken by a sudden knock. "Young master, what are you doing?" A voice called from outside. Vincent had no idea who was at the door. "I'm coming in," the voice declared, and the door swung open. Noticing the disarray of the room, Wilson asked Vincent why he had made such a mess. Vincent sat up and asked, "Are you my servant?" Wilson replied, "Of course I am your servant, young master. Whose else would I be?" Vincent remembered the boy's name was Wilson, and that 3 years from now, Julian would slit his throat. A pang of sympathy for the boy struck him, but he pushed the thought aside. He peeled off his clothes and tossed them to Wilson. "You've arrived at the perfect time," he said, ordering him to clean both the clothes and the room. Wilson was bewildered, unsure what had transpired. Vincent seemed stronger than usual. He quickly questioned how Vincent had managed to create such chaos, even suggesting he'd been doing something untoward. "I've done nothing wrong," Vincent stated flatly. The boy bristled. "You must have been practicing some dark magic or something," he exclaimed, adding that he needed to inform the steward immediately and report the incident to the clan head. "It's rare to hear someone speak so formally," Wilson continued, "yet spout such disrespectful nonsense." Vincent, now irritated, retorted, "I've given you more tasks than usual. Isn't that your damn job?" Wilson, losing his composure, reminded Vincent of his previous statement, that he disliked being told what to do when he didn't feel like it. "Do you think I'm here to clean up your messes?" Vincent asked pointedly. Wilson, now furious, snapped, "Yes, because I'm a servant. Am I wrong?" Then, in a sudden change of heart, he snatched up the clothes. "If you don't want to do it, then I don't have to either." Fear flickered in Wilson's eyes. "Where are you going, master?" he asked. Vincent replied, "I'm going to ask the steward you mentioned for some clothes, and I'll warn him that he'll have to come to me himself, because my servant, Wilson, refuses to work." This caught the young servant off guard, his anger momentarily forgotten. He snatched the clothes back from Vincent. "I'll clean everything too," he mumbled, retreating. Vincent knew that no matter how sensitive Vincent might be, a servant couldn't be this reckless and arrogant. They had likely placed him in this position deliberately. Julian materialized, agreeing. "I think so too. This was likely arranged so you could deal with this provocative and rude servant and demonstrate what the 7th young master of the Adenka clan is truly like." "Apparently, Wilson is part of the gang and has killed many people," Julian added. "So what should we do?" This made Vincent laugh. He laughed because someone who had committed multiple murders would possess a distinctly different energy, and he sensed no such thing from Wilson. "He's just a pathetic whelp," Vincent scoffed. Julian, taken aback, asked, "Are you jesting? How could you know such things?" "Because I'm the one who lived that life of murder in a past existence," Vincent replied. It was then that Julian realized he might have summoned someone far more terrifying than even the Elven King. A moment later, Wilson returned, announcing he had washed the clothes and cleaned the room. "Good," Vincent said, thanking him for his hard work. The servant, still emboldened, continued to press, telling Vincent not to turn his room into a battlefield next time. Wilson, believing he had gained the upper hand in this situation, remained smug until Vincent asked him to fetch a wooden training sword, approximately 1 meter long, weighing about 500 grams, and specifically made of black fragrant wood. Then, concluding his vassals would find plenty of swords within the family storehouse, Vincent dismissed the situation with a wave of his hand. Wilson, his servant, inquired what would happen if he refused. Vincent replied that he would go himself and would most certainly have a word with the storehouse guards. The guards, all skilled martial artists fiercely loyal to the direct descendants of the family, gave Wilson pause. He pleaded with his young master to wait. Wilson reached for Vincent's shoulder, but in a blur, found himself hoisted into the air by the small child and then unceremoniously dumped onto the floor. Vincent quickly apologized, explaining that a bad memory of being attacked from behind had triggered the impulsive action. The boy protested, claiming he'd never heard of such a thing. Vincent simply stated that now he should consider his vassal warned. Vincent's frail body ached from the exertion. Such a fragile vessel. As Wilson struggled to his feet, anger brewing, and opened his mouth to speak. Vincent fixed him with a fierce glare and asked what he had to say. The boy stammered, starting to explain that his master had requested a black, fragrant wooden training sword, approximately 1 meter long. Then, recalling the earlier exchange, he challenged Vincent, asking if he hadn't said he wouldn't retrieve it. Vincent's vassal countered that he had said he didn't want to get it, not that he wouldn't, and with that, he turned and left the room. He slammed the door hard, then quickly reopened it, claiming the wind had caught it. It wasn't on purpose, he insisted. Vincent, however, was pleased with his vassal's subtle shift in demeanor. Seething, Wilson went to retrieve the requested sword. He returned, fuming, vowing he wouldn't lose to Vincent again. He would show him who the real Wilson was. The boy stood, sword presented, awaiting praise. Vincent, however, merely remarked that he knew a man who was missing his right arm. Not only had this man led a difficult life without it, but his end had been rather unpleasant. Wilson, bewildered, handed over the sword, the whole situation feeling intensely awkward. He left the room. Alone now, Vincent decided he needed proper training. He made his way to the training grounds and began striking the practice dummies with focused precision. Exhaustion set in quickly, but he felt the stirrings of a natural martial artist within him. Suddenly, the dummy before him splintered in two. A boy arrived, looking down his nose at the scene. He scoffed, remarking that he hadn't realized someone so weak was standing before him. He introduced himself as Raven Adenka, already fully aware that the boy before him was Vincent. Vincent remained calm, while in his mind, Julian's voice echoed, identifying Raven as a distant relative of the family. He was also a favorite to win the True Sword tournament. Vincent even recognized the boy's father from his previous life. Raven approached Vincent, stating he knew that if he won the True Sword tournament, he would face Vincent. That was why he had sought him out. The True Sword tournament was a competition that brought together the children of several martial arts families connected to the Adenka clan. The victor of the True Sword tournament earned the opportunity to fight a direct descendant of the Adenka family, Vincent. The boy, Raven, began to question Vincent, wondering if he would cower in fear at the gathering since the swords there weren't wooden. Vincent retorted that a true warrior couldn't be afraid of a sword. Raven laughed, remarking that Vincent had a sharp tongue, likely inherited from being a direct descendant. Vincent scolded him, saying he should learn to speak properly as well. Even provocations, Vincent lectured, should have a certain dignity and style. He explained that in his past life, even missing an arm, he commanded respect from everyone. But now, some snot-nosed kid had torn apart his training dummy, a disgraceful act for any warrior. Vincent went further, declaring that Raven's father must not have taught him proper manners. Immediately, Raven pressed his sword against Vincent's neck, stating he wouldn't forgive the disrespect shown to his father. At this point, Julian warned Vincent that Raven was a 2-star and possessed the iron body trait, advising caution. But Vincent was furious. Raven had inherited his father's absurd habits and didn't act like an adult, and he clearly didn't understand the etiquette of a warrior. Vincent decided he would teach him some. Vincent flicked his wooden sword, stopping it just short of Raven's chin, and remarked that someone like him deserved a beating from the clan elders. Raven was stunned. Vincent wasn't supposed to possess mana, let alone know how to use imagery. He was certain he was stronger, but why? He felt like the boy in front of him could cut him down at any moment. Vincent sheathed his sword, stating that if Raven was scared by a mere wooden sword, they should just stop there. How could Raven face him with a real sword at the True Sword gathering? He scoffed at the idea, declaring that the gathering wasn't a place for wooden toys. This sent Raven into a complete rage. He lunged forward, screaming that he would kill Vincent. He had completely lost control. Seeing the situation escalating, Julian urged Vincent to run. But as Vincent remained calm, someone suddenly grabbed Raven's arm, stating he couldn't fight the young master here. If he injured Vincent now, he'd have an excuse to skip the True Sword gathering. Then, seething with anger, Raven declared they would meet in the arena, calling Vincent a cowardly kitten. Julian now questioned why Vincent had insulted the boy in the first place, predicting it wouldn't end well. Vincent replied that he was merely trying to discipline an ill-mannered child. At this, Julian was exasperated, saying he'd rather summon the Elven King than have an old man occupy his body. Suddenly, Vincent stumbled upon a childhood photo in the book he was perusing. Julian quickly flipped the page, telling him to focus. Then, an explanation of traits and blessings followed, revealing that Raven possessed the Iron Body trait, a blessing from the Dwarf King focused on strengthening the body. The more one honed a specific trait, the more powerful paths opened up. This was referred to as the tech tree. Iron Body was a mid-level trait, specializing in defense and destructive power. In short, martial arts techniques varied greatly. Raven displayed a level of accomplishment comparable to someone from Vincent's previous life, wielding the power of a trait. To compete with someone like that, Vincent had to acclimate himself to all these abilities. So, we return to the training grounds, where Vincent launched attack after attack. Onlookers remarked that he only used his left hand, and it was comical how he gasped for breath after only 2 or 3 swings. Suddenly, someone approached from behind, telling them not to speak so carelessly about the young man. It was Merlin, the vice commander of the White Sword Unit. He questioned what was so amusing about the Adenka family's young master practicing his martial arts. All the retainers immediately apologized and returned to their duties. Such was his standing. However, his thoughts echoed those of the retainers. They were right to call him the disgrace of the Adenka family. He swung his sword aimlessly, possessing neither mana nor even a trait. Julian worried about attracting everyone's attention, but Vincent didn't seem to care. He was used to being looked down upon by everyone. No one had expected Davin to win the Stormblade. But this time, he had successfully changed, walking towards the cheers. It meant he could do it again. Suddenly, someone offered him a potion. The man explained it was a high-grade recovery potion, and it would make his training easier. He introduced himself as Merlin, the vice commander of the White Sword Unit. Vincent asked, hadn't this man been mocking him just moments ago? Then why was he helping him now? Merlin admitted, truthfully, he had indeed laughed at first, but the boy's eyes looked desperate, as if searching for something. And the ones who deserved to be mocked were those who ridiculed a martial artist like him. Vincent said he would remember Merlin's name, then apologized for taking up the vice commander's time and dismissed him. As Merlin left, he thought to himself that the young master had changed significantly. From now on, things should improve for him. The boy trained all day, striking the straw dummy repeatedly. Then he sat down and drank the potion the vice commander had given him. In the evening, he studied mana and traits. He also practiced his balance and hip movements while swinging his sword. At that moment, he began to feel the mana within him and understand how it worked. It was similar to his previous life. Swordsmanship was constructed and layered with points and lines to manifest its power. At that moment, Vincent swung with all his might, finally cleaving the straw dummy in 2. Vincent had done it. His mastery was now complete. Sometime later, we see Wilson questioning whether his master was a rooster, wanting to eat at 5 o'clock in the morning. He then looked at the meal malevolently, muttering about a little humiliation being in order. He entered the room, announcing that breakfast was ready, but the boy was quickly rendered speechless. His meal was a mess, with some of the food missing. Vincent remarked that if he wanted to sneak a bite, he shouldn't make it so obvious. He should at least wipe his mouth first. Then the boy warned that he might seem calm and amiable now, but he expected his vassal not to overstep his bounds. The man said he had once been a street thug and had even killed a few people. Vincent scoffed, saying that was terrifying, but then inwardly mused that control through fear was easy, but it wouldn't earn him genuine loyalty or respect. That was why he hadn't used his power to pressure him. It was only then that the vassal realized his master had used telepathy and now possessed magic. Vincent told the boy not to be arrogant in his presence and warned him to stay by his side, for soon he would no longer be ashamed to be Vincent's vassal. In the Adenka clan's territory, when the time came, the vassal would have to choose between being ruled by fear or pledging his loyalty now. A few meters away, the vassal claimed he hadn't felt any pressure. But as he closed the door, it was clear he had felt it. The chill Vincent sent through him had nearly made him wet himself. Merlin was now patrolling the training grounds. It seemed young Master Vincent had been there to train earlier that day. Suddenly, something startled him. One of the straw dummies had been cleaved clean in 2. He wondered if a real sword had been used, but that didn't make sense. The last time he'd seen the boy, he was still using a wooden sword. Could someone have improved so drastically in mere days enough to make such a precise cut? Merlin even questioned what kind of martial art the boy had learned in his past life. The protagonist had complained about having only one arm, but now he had 2 and still only used one. Or was he messing around with just one arm? Meanwhile, Vincent was dressing in his room. Wilson folded clothes, awaiting further instructions. Julian mocked the boy for becoming unpleasantly more polite. Suddenly, Vincent inquired about his clothes. He pointed out that they were made of Levidio cotton. While economical, they were unsuitable for a nobleman. Furthermore, the quality of food provided to him was also subpar compared to the family's budget. In short, he declared that someone was embezzling funds. But Vincent's suspicions were quickly dismissed. Wilson asked what Levidio was. The embezzlement was obvious. Whoever was responsible, it wasn't Wilson, but someone of a higher rank. Raven was also training diligently in his room. In his mind, the ghost of the encounter taunted him, saying he was afraid of a small wooden sword. This fueled his anger further. He struck out with all his might, demanding to know who was afraid here. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and someone entered. It was his father, who remarked that his training seemed to be going well. He had come to tell him that there wasn't much time left before the real sword tournament. If they wanted to escape their impoverished life and the misery of being a secondary family, his son had to defeat Vincent. He gripped the boy's arm fiercely, declaring that he had to be the only member of a secondary family to surpass the main family. Regardless, the boy could only reply, "Yes, sir," to his father, who held such high hopes for him. If only he could defeat Vincent. His father and family could return to their former selves, and then he returned to Vincent's room. Julian handed him information on the participants in the upcoming event. Vincent was impressed, not just by the personal details included, but also by the meticulous notes on their techniques and habits. So impressed, in fact, that he remarked Julian was truly a terrifying individual. The Lesser God's plan was to borrow the Spirit King's power to make a grand entrance at the gathering. Thus, he would win the competition and obtain a crystal which, upon consumption, would instantly amplify the user's power. Seeing Julian so focused on all of this, Vincent could see how desperately the boy wanted to win. As a martial artist, it would be absurd to have all these resources and still lose. He stood up and declared that while he wasn't the Spirit King, Julian had been looking for him all along, and he promised to deliver a victory more valuable than anything the Spirit King could offer. A while later, he rang a bell, summoning Wilson. Wilson came running, breathlessly asking what his young master required. Vincent replied that he needed him to do something for him. Elsewhere, someone was looking through a stack of documents when Wilson entered through the doorway. He greeted the individual. This was the regent, Railsha, who immediately inquired what the boy wanted. Standing before a 7-star martial artist, Wilson trembled. Wilson stammered that his young master had a message for the clan head. The woman simply remarked that the young master seemed to lack the courage to see his father. So, Wilson declared that his master requested the clan head's presence at the True Sword Tournament, as he intended to prove his worth as a core member of the Haidenka clan. The woman was about to retort that the clan head had never attended the tournament before, when Wilson added that this was the prize for diverting the budget and making the impossible possible. The woman demanded to know what he had just said, but Wilson, trembling, claimed he was merely relaying his young master's command, and with that, having received the regent's leave, he departed. She understood. The boy could have come himself, which would have been even more effective, but he deliberately chose to send Wilson as a display of authority. She said, with a hint of satisfaction, that the boy was finally understanding her intentions. Meanwhile, in the clan head's room, the man radiated a terrifying aura. Suddenly, he called out to Railsha, indicating he had sensed her presence. The woman got straight to the point, stating that young Master Vincent had invited the clan head to the True Sword Tournament. The man grumbled that it seemed age was affecting the woman and told her to cease such pointless behavior. But she pressed on, stating that the boy would prove his worth as a core member of the Haidenka clan. The clan head asked if he had heard the phrase, "prove his worth" correctly. Then he asked for Railsha's opinion, questioning whether she believed the boy possessed sufficient skill to even speak of his bloodline's worth. She replied with an absolute no, which was precisely why he was pledging to prove himself this time. She implored him to attend, even offering to be his stand-in. The man simply asked if she understood what that entailed. Railsha declared that if Vincent failed to prove himself, she would offer her own head to the clan head. The man responded, expressing his confusion as to why she would go to such lengths. Railsha simply stated that Vincent's perceived weaknesses were, in fact, his strengths. The clan head feigned surprise when the topic of the budget discrepancy arose. He knew her manipulation was a calculated move, intended for the boy's benefit. Since she planned to invest those funds in Vincent's future, he saw no reason to interfere. After all, Railsha served her and not him. Whatever methods the boy employed suited her just fine. Without sacrificing his dignity, the clan head voiced his skepticism about Vincent's intentions. Could this boy truly be Savannah's son, the son of that legendary woman? He then rose and conceded, admitting Railsha had won. Vincent would participate in the true sword tournament. The day of the tournament finally arrived. Raven, one of the participants, stood with an air of unwavering determination. His goal for the day was singular: to defeat his rival, Vincent. Suddenly, Raven looked up, noticing a distinguished presence. He was surprised to see the clan head present. Raven assumed he had come to witness the rising star of the branch family. The tournament commenced. Raven locked onto his opponent. His opponent was fully engaged in defense. With a headbutt, Raven scoffed, telling him not to be so overconfident. But his opponent's confidence quickly shattered as his sword snapped. Raven pressed his advantage, finishing what he had started. He struck, splintering his opponent's shield. From the stands, Raven's father roared his approval. Whispers rippled through the crowd, speaking of the rising star from the branch family. Vincent observed, noting that compared to his past life, these children were truly gifted. Yet, their martial skill was far beneath his own. Their primary strength stemmed from their inherent attributes, and he saw no real battle experience in their movements. That must be why Raven relied so heavily on his attribute, attacking so recklessly. Raven bowed to the spectators. He offered begrudging praise to his defeated opponent for not fleeing the fight. Vincent, for his part, anticipated their upcoming duel. The clan head watched intently. Moments later, a broken sword flew through the air. A boy was flung back by an immense force. The victor, once again, was a Denka Raven. Turning to the clan head, Raven declared that having defeated all other contenders as dictated by the Elder's laws, he must now face a close friend in combat, and that person must be Vincent Hydenka. In short, he demanded a duel with the direct descendant of the clan. Vincent, without hesitation, accepted the challenge. Now face to face with his opponent, the judge, Zarin, asked if they were ready. Vincent requested a moment, stating he had a condition. His vassal, Wilson, stepped forward, presenting him with a wooden training sword. As if the humiliation of facing Raven with a wooden sword wasn't enough, Vincent declared he wouldn't use his right arm and would allow Raven 3 free strikes. From the stands, Raven's father burned with rage, while others simply thought Vincent had lost his mind. Vincent added one final stipulation. He wouldn't move a single step from his current position. When the boy launched his attack, Raven flew into a rage, demanding to know if Vincent was planning to mock him until the very end. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, whispers of Vincent's lack of martial skill and the audacity of his arrogance. His father, bellowing from the stands, roared that Vincent was merely trying to manufacture an excuse for his inevitable loss. Yet, on the other hand, the clan had allowed it. He added that Vincent should prove his words with actions. The boy replied that he would. Then the judge declared the fight to begin. Raven demanded that Vincent attack him with all his might, but Vincent asked if he was deaf. He stated he would allow Raven 3 attacks without retaliating. And so, the confrontation began. Raven charged toward his opponent with all his strength. Vincent was fully prepared for this. The previous day, he had been discussing the possibilities of Raven's attacks with Julian. His first move would be a short thrust and a feint, while the second would most likely be his trump card. But Vincent considered him too predictable, even if his endurance attribute was exceptionally high. The boy didn't even possess the basics of martial arts. Channeling mana into his hand, Vincent stated, firstly, that broadswords weren't suited for thrusting attacks. Raven couldn't believe Vincent had actually blocked his sword. At this point, Vincent declared that he had allowed 2 attacks. Raven could only curse. Then, consumed by rage, he prepared to unleash a ferocious horizontal slash. But his hand was caught. With effortless ease, Vincent tripped him, sending him sprawling to the ground with that single move. A Sharpain shot through Raven. Vincent then announced that Raven had completed his 3rd attack. Now, Raven thought Vincent would uphold his promise to Julian. He would also keep his promise to his father and the clan head. Now it was his turn to attack. The crowd was stunned. Even Zarin, the judge, couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The clan head watched the fight with rapt attention, while Raven's father, as always, was consumed by fury. He kept shouting, demanding to know why his son hadn't gone back on his feet, why he was struggling against someone who couldn't even use mana. Julian himself couldn't understand what was happening, as he couldn't see. Of course, it all had to do with Vincent's past life, where he had trained with only one arm and often empty-handed. The boy before him began to rise, saying he now understood. Vincent must have acquired a trait, and it must have come from a lesser god he didn't want to reveal. Julian bristled at the mention of a lesser god. Vincent replied that he didn't care what Raven thought. Raven, fueled by rage, charged again, attempting to end the fight. Julian urged Vincent to dodge the attack, warning him of its danger. Vincent did just that. Now he had an opening to attack, and he would strike with considerable force. Raven saw the opening, but it was too late. Though the wooden sword struck his neck, he was surprised to find there was no pain. His father yelled from the stands, declaring it obvious. As a practice, sword could never break the defense of a body of steel. But the truth was, this had to do with Vincent's then frail and untrained body. Raven stepped forward scornfully, declaring he would demonstrate a gap that talent alone couldn't bridge. Vincent unleashed a powerful thrust, striking Raven squarely in the chest and sending him flying several meters. Infuriated, Vincent shouted to Zarin, the judge, that he had to intervene and, if possible, prevent a tragedy. This startled the tournament announcer. Gathering immense strength in his legs, Vincent lunged towards his airborne opponent, explaining that if he used this power even once, his body would collapse. So he had to finish this while Raven was still in the air. Even mid-flight, Raven attempted to counterattack, but now Vincent could see everything. He saw the trajectory of the sword strokes connect. Vincent surged forward, his voice ringing with intensity, telling Julian to watch the swordsmanship, how all the points connected. With all his might, he descended from the air and with a single blow, severed Raven's arm. Raven's father couldn't believe his eyes. The clan head, too, was impressed. Vincent had cleaved through space, distorting the flow of mana. He used it all to cut through everything, including his opponent's abilities. It was a control ability from his past life. Raven screamed in agony, lamenting that he could no longer feel his arm. Vincent then angrily demanded of the judge if he needed to sever the other arm before being declared the victor. The announcer then declared Vincent Hydenka the winner. They were attempting to staunch the bleeding, but they said the only thing that would work now was finding a priest. Meanwhile, Vincent berated Zarin, saying he had asked him to prevent a tragedy, to which the man could only apologize. Julian asked how Vincent could remain so calm when his body was on the verge of collapse. But Vincent, looking at the clan head, said he had kept his promise. The clan head was initially impassive, but then spoke, acknowledging that Vincent had said he would prove his worth, and that the main family line was different now than in the past, and he had indeed done so with exceptional skill. He then personally declared Vincent Hydenka the winner of the True Sword Tournament. He commanded everyone to follow him as the awards ceremony was about to begin. As night fell, Vincent stood before the clan head. A beautiful stone rested in a box. The clan head explained that this magical stone was only given to those who overcame adversity. He was about to present it to Vincent when someone suddenly burst through the door, yelling that this made no sense. It was Raven's father, claiming it all had to be a trick, asserting that Vincent must have borrowed the power of some apostle. Then, someone stepped up behind Raven's father, saying they had a problem. The clan head urgently asked what was the matter. The problem was, young Master Raven's arm could no longer be reattached. I think this author has a thing for severed arms. Raven's father, furious, demanded to know if his son was truly going to lose an arm forever. He raged, ranting about the absurdity of a priest being unable to reattach a severed limb. In his defense, the priest stammered that the injury was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Even Julian, it seemed, was baffled by what Vincent had done. The wound appeared as if cauterized by some unknown force, resistant even to divine healing. The priest warned that if they didn't act quickly, even the high priest might be unable to mend it. Raven's father, his anger a palpable force in the room, turned to the clan head. He demanded to know if such a wound, impervious even to a third circle priest, could have been inflicted through legitimate means. His implication hung heavy in the air. Whispers rippled through the gathered crowd. To quell the rising unrest, Vincent addressed the clan head, requesting permission to handle the situation. Granted leave, Vincent spoke, his voice clear and steady. The true sword gathering, he reminded them, was held in the clan head's presence. Therefore, any method employed before him was to be considered valid. The clan head, echoing Vincent's assertion, declared him the victor. Charles Adenka, Raven's father, was now openly challenging the clan head's authority before several esteemed guests. Vincent calmly inquired whether Charles believed his judgment superior to the clan head's, effectively silencing the man. Vincent turned to Zarin and ordered Charles Adenka's arrest. As Charles began to protest, Vincent cut him short, stating that he had questioned the clan head's authority. Publicly, no less. Zarin, acknowledging the command, moved swiftly. Within seconds, Charles was wrestled to the ground and bound. The clan head then addressed Charles directly, asking if he still failed to grasp that he now owed Vincent a debt. Adenka law, he explained, forbade double jeopardy. Had Vincent not intervened, Charles's head would have already rolled. As clan head and a father himself, he would show leniency this once. But he sternly warned Charles to hold his tongue. The clan head commended Vincent for his handling of the situation. Julian, seemingly pleased by the praise bestowed upon his companion, smiled. Raven, however, remained in a dire state. At this rate, his arm seemed destined to remain severed. Julian leaned in, whispering to Vincent. He had a plan, he murmured, one that could turn the situation to their advantage. Approaching Raven's side, Vincent addressed the attending healers. He inquired whether the arm was truly beyond repair, even with a miracle stone. They conferred briefly amongst themselves. Acknowledging their grim prognosis, Vincent turned to the clan head. Since he was responsible for severing Raven's arm, he proposed, would he be permitted to resolve the matter? The clan head, intrigued, granted him full authority. Vincent then declared that Raven had shown him disrespect as a martial artist. This prompted a hasty apology from Charles, who lamented his failure as a father. Taking a sword from a nearby guard, Vincent stated that actions spoke louder than words. He sliced through Charles's bonds and commanded him to demonstrate the conduct befitting a martial artist. If he did so, Vincent promised to heal Raven with a miracle stone. His offer, however, carried a chilling undertone of retribution. An arm for an arm. He wanted Charles Adenka's right arm. At that moment, Vincent thought the man a pathetic creature. He hadn't even spoken, perhaps valuing a right arm more than his own son. But then, the man drew his sword, placed his arm upon the table, and declared his willingness to sacrifice it. A sudden rage consumed him, his whole body trembling. In that instant, they realized that, even twisted, it was still paternal love. He was willing to give his own arm for his beloved son. As he brought the sword down towards his arm, Vincent, a flicker of anger in his eyes, turned aside and demanded that any mishap be prevented. Zarin reacted instantly, his blade flashing across, shattering Charles's sword into fragments. The only reason the man's arm remained intact was the broken blade. Vincent remarked that he hoped the man would find better use for such courage next time. Then, he leaned down and informed the clan head that the matter was resolved. The clan head, once again praising Vincent's actions, handed him the miracle stone. Wasting no time, Vincent passed the stone to the priest, who began chanting sacred incantations, the stone held within his mouth. As the stone crumbled, the boy's arm was restored, the pain vanishing. Charles wept with joy, a wave of relief washing over him. Even though the precious stone had been used, it was still a significant loss, for the stone held immense power. Wilson, on the other side of the door, listening to all of this, chuckled to himself. His master was truly audacious, truly magnificent. He recalled the boy's words, the choice between pledging allegiance and being ruled by fear. He had made his decision. Loyalty to this prodigy promised to be far more interesting. The next day, Wilson stood at the door, a smile gracing his face, announcing that he would hasten to prepare his master's dinner. Julian couldn't believe his eyes. Suddenly, a knock echoed through the room. Vincent, bidding them enter, assumed it was Wilson with his meal. But it wasn't his attendant who entered, it was Duran, a Pope of Gaia, come to express his gratitude for what had transpired. Julian stared in disbelief at the scene unfolding before him. The man was presenting Vincent with a miracle stone. He explained that the stone had been intended to heal young Master Raven. But Vincent questioned the logic of giving it to him now. Duran explained that allowing those who suffered to rise and then laughing about it was what made him a pope. He had strayed from that path, previously weighing the value of a miracle stone against a human life. Vincent, on the other hand, had nonchalantly given up his newly acquired stone. In short, this young man had made them reflect upon themselves. He implored Vincent to accept the stone. Vincent demurred, saying he didn't deserve such praise, but accepting would be the proper way to respect the man's decision. He thanked him, then added that there was one more thing. He then presented Duran with a temple card, instructing him to present it should he ever need assistance. He also revealed, though it wasn't yet public knowledge, that he had become a second circle priest. Julian could scarcely believe what he'd just heard. In short, if he possessed the card Vincent had given him, he would have access to unlimited healing and free use of the temple. Finally, Duran, the Pope of Gaia, expressed his gratitude, saying he'd learned a great deal from the young master. Vincent simply wished him well. Both felt a sense of satisfaction with how things had unfolded. Suddenly, Julian remembered something he'd forgotten to mention. He explained that there was a tradition where the clan head invited a member of the family to dine with him after the True Sword tournament, especially if, like Vincent, the second child of Dynam, they achieved an overwhelmingly decisive victory. In short, there was a chance, albeit slim, Julian estimated around 50%, that the clan head might summon him tonight. Vincent rose, declaring that even though he was exhausted, this wasn't the time to rest. Quickly changing into more appropriate attire, he reasoned that if such an opportunity arose, as Julian suggested, it was best to be prepared. This pleased the lesser spirit. It was strange to have someone place such trust in him. Suddenly, Wilson burst into the room, stammering about urgent news. He began to stutter something about the clan head, but Vincent cut him off. The clan head has invited me to his residence, hasn't he? Wilson was astonished by Vincent's foresight. Now, at the main Adenka estate, Vincent was making his way through the corridors towards the clan head's office when a woman's voice urged him to hurry. He turned, surprised. The woman before him was his stepmother, Vesa Hylen. Vincent's birth mother had passed away shortly after his birth. He politely greeted her. Vesa, a formidable martial artist, once known as the Giant on the battlefield, was now retired and managed all affairs related to the Adenka family. She simply stated that they must hurry, as Vincent's father was waiting. They entered the room calmly, but were immediately taken aback by the clan head's demeanor. He appeared furious. He barked Vincent's name, and the boy felt a pressure so intense it made it difficult to breathe. Vincent quickly deduced that the clan head wouldn't normally behave this way. This had to be a test. He spoke, "I don't believe it's necessary to deliberately pressure your son during a private meeting." The clan head simply asked why he thought so. Sweating, Vincent replied, "My mother addressed you as father, not clan head." This implied a more informal setting. The clan head, impressed, praised Vincent's observation, his stern facade cracking. He then explained he had summoned Vincent for two reasons: to congratulate him on his victory and to gauge the validity of Charles Adenka's complaint. Charles remained convinced that Vincent had cheated. At that moment, Vincent felt an immense presence probing his mind. It was his stepmother, Vesa, examining his thoughts. Under this immense scrutiny, Vincent perspired. The clan head asked if there was any chance Vincent was an apostle. Vesa confirmed there was no such possibility. Vincent couldn't comprehend the terrifying pressure he felt. Julian later remarked that this was undoubtedly Vesa's special ability. Her eyes could see the truth. The clan head continued his interrogation, pressing Vincent about the nature of his martial skill. It defied logic that Vincent, without channeling mana to his heart, could sever the arm of a second circle warrior. Vesa, Vincent's stepmother, simply replied that the swordsmanship resembled that of the great hero, Kaji. Legend held that Kaji wielded his sword in a peculiar manner, capable of devouring any skill that stood in his path. He was so powerful, the stories claimed, that he could effortlessly subdue even the mighty demon, Davin. Hearing these words twisted yet again, Finch, the clan head, flew into a rage and turned towards his son, Julian. Vesa urged Julian to speak. He had to reveal how he had learned this swordsmanship, so reminiscent of the hero Sam Ian, or in this case, Kaji. She pressed the boy relentlessly, demanding to know if he intended to confess. At this moment, Vincent understood. It wasn't his father who had summoned him. This interrogation, led by his stepmother, was aimed at uncovering the origin of his martial skills. Julian, panicked, pleaded with Vincent to say nothing. The woman before them possessed eyes that could discern truth from falsehood. Even if he fabricated an excuse, it would be futile. The pressure was immense. They were trapped, unsure of what to do or say. Julian desperately searched for a solution. Vesa pressed again, commanding Julian to speak. However, the young second circle priest was so terrified that his mind was blank. It was then that Vincent spoke. "It's just one step," he said, "just one step to overcome all your fears. You just need to take that first step and the rest will follow." He decided to take that first step for Julian, telling Vesa that he had received a revelation. She simply asked if he was claiming divine inspiration. Without a blessing, she demanded, her voice laced with anger, "Are you unaware that in most cases, revelations cannot be received without a blessing? Unless it's a dark revelation," she added. He feigned ignorance. Noticing his suspicious demeanor, she asked if he wished to be judged by the holy court, or if he preferred to stand before Jeremy, a judge known for his harshness. At this point, Julian, finding his voice, told her to repeat what he was about to say. If his mother found him suspicious, she should go to the temple to verify his claims. This caught her off guard. He argued that if he harbored any darkness, he would never have been granted a miracle stone by a third circle priest, nor would he have received their endorsement. Vesa asked if the miracle stone was the one she had given to Duran. He confirmed it was. Examining him with her discerning gaze, she realized the boy wasn't lying. She then inquired if he had learned his swordsmanship through revelation. He explained that while he had learned many things through revelation, swordsmanship wasn't one of them. He had always been able to decipher the mystical movements of the sword and had contemplated for days whether he should pursue it. He desired change, and though it might arouse suspicion, he believed inaction was cowardice. Weaving their truths together, they argued that they felt compelled to act, to alter their current circumstances. Their desire was to demonstrate their growing strength to their numerous relatives, and in doing so, prove their worth to their father. He had done this because he believed his father capable of sound judgment. Therefore, since the temple had also sanctioned it all, the final decision rested with his father. The man stroked his chin thoughtfully. His wife, Vesa, recognized the gesture. It was a habit of his when pleased. He then delivered his verdict. The boys would continue their martial arts training. The thought seemed to genuinely delight him. Vesa reminded Finch, the clan head, that surely he knew Hiro Kajin's swordsmanship bore a striking resemblance to that of the great demon king, Devon. He confirmed his awareness, his voice steady. She pressed on. If Vincent were to use the hero's swordsmanship, the Samyang clan would accuse them of theft. However, if it was the great demon king's style, they would have no grounds for complaint. She asked if she could assume his decision had been made with all this in mind. He affirmed, with a certain steel in his voice, that he had considered what needed considering. No further explanation was necessary. Vesa sighed, then addressed Vincent. Since the clan head had given his approval, he would be held responsible for the consequences. Therefore, the boy must strive to improve so as not to cause his father any inconvenience. It wasn't merely a warning. It was a reinforcement of Finch's decision, an endorsement of his authority. Finch declared that Vincent had performed admirably, proving himself worthy of being a direct descendant of the Adenka family. As such, he would grant the boy something he desired. He asked what Vincent wanted. Vincent, ever focused, replied that he wished to become stronger. Finch nodded, acknowledging the ambition as a good answer, but one he must achieve on his own. He prompted Vincent to ask for something the clan head could do for him. Julian, ever quick-witted, urged Vincent to request access to the library. Finch explained that only 3-star martialists were permitted entry, and inquired whether Vincent had managed to connect the image to his heart. Vincent admitted he hadn't yet. Vincent, seizing the opportunity, allowed himself a small, almost mischievous smile, playing the part of a spoiled child. Finch, unfazed, granted him access to the lower levels of the library, accessible to 3-star martialists. He also requested that Vesa grant him the Crimson Lotus Sword, Tavington. Finch instructed her to bring the weapon. It was a reward a promise kept. The Crimson Lotus was the very sword his father had wielded in his youth, the blade that had forged his legend. The sword was practically a piece of Adenka family history. Julian could barely contain his excitement. Finch cautioned him against complacency, reminding him of the greater achievements that lay ahead. The young godling was practically vibrating with joy. He wondered privately if he would have achieved so much if he had summoned the Spirit King instead of the old man currently residing within him. At this moment, he felt a flicker of doubt, a questioning of his pact. He shook off the thought. Outside, he told Wilson it was time to leave. Just then, his stepmother, Vesa, appeared on the staircase. She asked if he had a moment. She acknowledged his diligent training, expressing her pride in him. Now that he had won the true sword tournament, tradition dictated he enter the Crimson Fortress. She asked if he had considered how he would subdue the Crimson Demon. The Crimson Fortress was one of the few training facilities owned by the Adenka family. Only those who completed the fortress training would be officially recognized as martial artists. The condition for entering the fortress was winning the true sword tournament and defeating a lesser demon known as the Crimson Demon. Unsure of the answer, Vincent told his stepmother, Vesa, that he didn't know. This surprised her, as she had assumed he had everything figured out. She also asserted that the strange swordsmanship he had previously used must have put a great strain on his entire body. Although she asked to hear what she had to say, there was no way to defeat that demon in a single strike. If he were to fight the demon now, in his current state, he would surely die. After hearing his stepmother's admonition, Julian, stating that it was impossible for Vincent to defeat the Crimson Demon in one blow, asked her why she was advising them. From Vincent's perspective, it seemed she was starting to take a liking to them. She could have accused them, but she didn't. She might not be fond of them, but she still wouldn't harbor animosity. Before his stepmother continued speaking, Vincent thanked her for the advice and said he wouldn't disappoint her. Seeing him leave without even waiting for an explanation of the Crimson Demon's characteristics, with his martial skills and courage, her heart stirred with excitement for the boy's future. The next day, Wilson, the attendant, was making the bed, humming a tune, saying he would continue to do his best to support Vincent. Suddenly, he received a slap on the head. The maid, Celia, asked him what kind of trouble he was planning to cause with the young master, as she still didn't trust him. The attendant replied that he was just doing laundry, which impressed her that he was actually working. Celia asked where the young master was, and he replied that Vincent was in the library, a place accessible only to the family's martial artists. Inside the library, Vincent was growing frustrated, unable to find any records from 500 years ago. Julian commented that it was truly strange, as it appeared as though a piece of history had been deliberately removed, as if someone had intentionally erased it. Vincent decided to think about it later, as his most pressing concern was raising his skill level. At his current level, he couldn't defeat the Crimson Demon, so he needed a training method. Before the image theory, Julian mentioned that Vincent had called his father Finch a child, and had also used the swordsmanship of the deceased hero king, Kaji, which made him question Vincent's true identity. Vincent thought that if he revealed he was the Demon King, Julian might be terrified, but lying would also be disrespectful, as the Demon King was the previous owner of this body and share the same fate. He decided to tell the truth and revealed his true name. However, upon hearing the name, Julian felt a terrible headache. Unable to comprehend what Vincent had said, he asked him to repeat it, but the pain only intensified. Vincent, worried about Julian, gave up on trying to explain his identity, until finally, Vincent found a book titled First Love at the Watermill. Julian wondered how a romance novel could end up amongst magical training manuals, but since this was a family-run library, the chances of it being simply a romance novel were slim, so he read the contents. They discovered that someone had managed to preserve secret historical records disguised as a romance novel. Vincent thought it might be a slightly different approach and continued reading. He found that the protagonist of the book didn't use imagery, but the power of love as a trait. The protagonist was able to freely use the trait, but Julian said it was impossible and dangerous. But Vincent said that whoever did it survived and wrote the book, even though he felt it was dangerous. They had finally found a clue to getting stronger faster, and they needed to test it immediately. Leaving the library, Vincent ran into Celia, the maid, who asked him if he had really defeated Raven. Vincent asked Julian who the woman was, but in his memories, he saw her as someone who had a soft spot for underdogs. Just like him. Upon discovering that he had actually defeated Raven, she collapsed to the ground in relief, thinking he would be even more overlooked after the gathering. Then, Celia asked Julian if he knew how to comfort a woman, but he said he hadn't learned that in magic and spirit classes, even though they both knew how to. Vincent apologized for keeping secrets and said he was working hard to become a leader she wouldn't be ashamed of as he tried to comfort her. Raven appeared, breaking the mood, saying he had been looking for Vincent and had something to tell him. The two went to a room and stood face to face, silence hanging heavy in the air. Celia asked if he wanted a sandwich, but Raven was embarrassed by his loss. Drawing his sword, he said he would avenge what happened at the gathering. Vincent hadn't expected him to attack. He drew his own sword, knowing it would be impossible to use the same tactic as last time. He told Celia to leave, but before she could take any action, Raven said he was incredibly grateful to him. Besides forgiving his disrespect and giving him the miracle stone, he had also spared his father the fate of having his arm cut off. Unable to do anything as a coward back then, he decided to give him the thing that mattered most to him, his loyalty. Placing his sword on the ground and kneeling before Vincent, he swore fealty. Vincent was happily realizing that not all the martial artists of this generation were hopeless. Julian questioned whether he was lying, but Vincent said that he had pointed the sword at himself, a martial artist sign of offering their life to someone, and he was serious. Julian said he would believe Raven, but before that, he offered Vincent a deal. Vincent accepted the oath, placing the sword on his shoulder. He said he would stand by him until the moment he betrayed him. Raven realized the sword he was holding was the Crimson Lotus Sword, which meant the clan head had already given his directive, making him even more certain that he should pledge his loyalty to him. Witnessing this scene, Celia realized Vincent had truly changed. The time when he was branded a failure now felt like a distant dream. Julian seized the opportunity to suggest they leverage Raven to obtain the Dwarf King's blessing. Sometime later, in the clan head's hall, Vesa, Vincent's stepmother, remarked that he seemed to be planning to enter the Crimson Fortress next year. Finch, the clan head, questioned her about Vincent's progress towards conquering the Crimson Demon. Vesa replied that she had even tried to inform Vincent of the specific resources at his disposal, but he had confidently refused them. The Crimson Demon, she explained, could attack with the force of a 3-star martialist and possessed no physical form. Conquering it was considered a rite of passage, proving one's strength surpassed that of a 3-star martialist. She added that a Danker Raven had been spending all his time in Vincent's room for the past few days. The scene shifted to show Raven assisting Vincent with his training. They explained their plan to obtain the Dwarf King's blessing using the method described in the book. However, for it to work, Vincent had to meditate beside Raven while Raven guided him through the process. Essentially, Vincent was entrusting his life to Raven. He deemed it acceptable, as Raven had already pledged his loyalty. Shame washed over Raven again, as if he were reliving the situation. He couldn't bring himself to trust anyone the way Vincent trusted him. He was also impressed by the audacious methods Vincent was employing. He'd never imagined someone of direct lineage would risk their life to become stronger. Julian scolded Vincent, pointing out that he was essentially walking a tightrope over a precipice. Even Raven cautioned him, saying he was moving too fast and shouldn't rush. But for Vincent, this was how he had always lived. He had never been handed anything, so he'd always had to risk his life to advance. Julian worried that Vincent might die, but Vincent was nearly finished with the entire process. The only thing missing was the connection. He easily forced the two parts together, but shortly after, they ruptured, causing a massive explosion. Raven was thrown back, landing hard on the bed, badly injured. Meanwhile, Finch stated that there were 6 months until the next entry period for the Crimson Fortress. Since Vincent had already successfully defeated a 2-star martialist, subduing the Crimson Demon should be just another minor hurdle for him. Back in the room, Raven asked Vincent if he was alright. Even as a 2-star martialist himself, he claimed it had taken him half a year to absorb the Dwarf King's attributes. Even if Vincent were a genius, it would still take 2 months, but Vincent didn't have that much time. His father had declared that he must defeat the Crimson Demon within a month. Wilson, the attendant, went to deliver the news. Vesa was visibly worried that he didn't have much time to prepare. When she opened the door to his room, The sight within startled her. She saw the room completely destroyed, with Vincent and Raven being tended to by Celia. She immediately demanded an explanation of what had happened. Raven was frightened by her appearance, as she was a 7-star attendant. Vincent said she shouldn't worry, claiming he had simply been meditating. Celia called him a liar, saying no one would end up like this after simple meditation. Wilson, the attendant, realized everything about him had changed, from his presence to the way he spoke. When he told her not to worry and that she shouldn't ask any more questions, she told him to hurry up and finish this meditation, because his father, Finch, had ordered him to complete his coming-of-age ceremony within a month. Julian said he had never given a deadline before. Vincent was pleased, as this meant he had expectations for him. Vessa, his stepmother, went on to explain that in a month she would personally become his protector, and she hoped he would be fully prepared by then. Raven was worried, as he needed at least 2 months to receive the Dwarf King's blessing, while Celia was more concerned about Vincent's health and asked him not to overexert himself. He assured her he wouldn't overexert himself, but he eventually realized she had a lot of magic power within her. The magic power flowed within her as if she were hiding something. Regardless, he asked her to leave, as he had a lot to discuss with Raven. He told Vincent that 1 month wasn't enough to acquire the Dwarf King's trait, and suggested trying other enhancement methods. Vincent then displayed something that surprised them both. He had successfully completed a magic circuit. Once he forced the flow, he could quickly draw a conclusion. Julian was delighted and said that someone qualified could truly do anything, while Vincent said that instead of waiting a month, he would surpass his father's expectations in 2 weeks. The 3 of them met in the middle of the forest. Vincent would once again attempt to manifest the trait. With the 2 prepared, Vincent told Raven to step back, as there might be an explosion like last time, but he was determined to stay and witness his success firsthand. He then began to move the flow of magic power, creating a complete spiral pattern. This pattern connected and expanded, generating several circles. Julian said it was a completely different feeling, and when he looked up, he could see the Dwarf King. Perhaps only he could see him, as he was also a deity. The Dwarf King prepared to attack and struck Vincent head-on, completing the trait. Raven said he had acquired the first defensive trait, Reinforced Body. This was slightly ahead of his expectations. Raven was also shocked by Vincent's speed of evolution. In less than a month, he had received the Dwarf King's blessing. Seeing the Dwarf King slowly disappear, Julian told him to go home. Vincent was glad he had started laying the foundation for conquering the Crimson Demon. He thanked Raven, who said he should only thank him when he defeated the demon. He took this opportunity to ask him for help again. 2 days later, Vincent, in brand new attire, finally headed to the Crimson Demon's lair and apologized to Wilson for the sudden request, because he just wanted to surpass his father's expectations. Wilson was worried, as he had not only failed to utilize all the available time, but had also moved the deadline forward by 2 weeks. Vessa wondered if he would truly be all right. She said she had overseen the rite of passage from clan head to successor 3 times, and no one in the family had ever failed the test. She warned that he couldn't be the first. Vincent appeared resolute, telling her not to worry, as he wouldn't be facing the Crimson Demon. Inside the carriage, Vincent, with unfounded bravado, told Julian that guardians assigned to missions like this were useless. But, he added, they were there to retrieve the Crimson Demon's treasures and also to monitor him. Julian asked if he had even researched the Crimson Demon. 3-star martialist rank and a certain level of mana were the first steps to conquering it. She explained, analyzing that he surely hadn't met the prerequisites yet. Vincent noted that he had never asked about the Crimson Demon, but told her not to worry, as this demon was his first prey. She warned him not to let his guard down, even with his strange swordsmanship. Vincent questioned why she was even helping him. Julian replied that she was the financial guardian of the test. He realized she was lying and asked if she was actually trying to cover up a budget discrepancy. If she didn't want to talk about it, that was fine. He conceded, as she hadn't asked anything about his training either. They finally arrived at the testing grounds. The Crimson Demon's lair was the ruin of an ancient temple, a monument erected by the Alcran priests after they defeated one of the great demon's remnants. Raven, Vincent said, and then Julian drew her sword, stating she would prepare the arena. She pointed upwards, and a massive beam of light appeared, a barrier filling the entire temple space. A one-way barrier, Julian explained, that won't allow the monster to pass. Vincent finally began the test. The Crimson Demon finally appeared. Finch told Vesa to watch closely and report accurately, how he would gloriously surpass his father's expectations. Just then, Vincent was attacked by the Crimson Demon. Julian called out from the sidelines, telling him to evade the attack, as creating distance was a significant advantage against this opponent. But Vincent did the opposite. He advanced. The Crimson Demon, having been on the offensive, was now defending against Vincent's onslaught, preventing him from using his sidesteps to counterattack. Launching several attacks, Finch, watching from afar, remarked that closing the distance with a range attacker was obvious. But this was Vincent's first real battle, and he was only 14. He fought as if he had already subdued the Crimson Demon hundreds of times. Meanwhile, Vincent was truly pleased with the Dwarf King's imprint, as it allowed him to move freely even without a trained body. He knew, however, that this was all just a stepping stone to enhance his true swordsmanship. Using the demon's scythe as a springboard, he leaped back, managing to create a good distance. The Crimson Demon was an aggressive monster. Simply defending itself must have been stressful. Rage simplified its movements, making his path with the sword much easier when facing an opponent full of openings. Using the Dwarf King's imprint to lessen the drain on his swordsmanship, Vincent carved a path through the demon's form. With a single decisive strike, he subdued it, causing a small, crimson orb to drop from its dissolving body. He glanced at Celia, his attendant, questioning with his eyes if she had observed closely, but her expression remained one of dissatisfaction, seemingly unmoved by his swift victory. A flicker of worry touched Vincent. Could it be that he'd forgotten something crucial? The Crimson Demon wasn't supposed to fall so easily. It was known to have 2 lives, and just as he suspected, it began to materialize again behind him, poised to strike. Celia tried to warn him, but Vincent, anticipating this, effortlessly evaded the attack. He thought it would be exactly like the encounter 500 years ago, a memory etched into his very being. But he was taken aback by the demon's renewed assault, far swifter than the first. He managed to dodge at the last moment, realization dawning on him. Not only had the Crimson Demon's appearance changed, but it had also grown stronger. They've evolved in these past 500 years, Celia stated, her voice low. The resurrected Crimson Demon, now enraged, surged with increased speed and power. It lashed out with a palm strike, sending a shockwave rippling through the ground. Vincent evaded the blow, but the danger was palpable. It's too dangerous to face it head-on now, he muttered. His escape route was blocked by a wall. The Crimson Demon attacked again, its scythe-like claws, cleaving the stone in 2. Julian's voice echoed in his mind. You're not doing this right. You should be using the plan. I have to make it drop its guard first. Vincent retorted mentally. He was likely thinking of pushing the demon into a corner, forcing it to overextend, then delivering a final, devastating blow. When he was fully prepared to deliver that final strike, then he would execute the plan. Celia watched from afar, her thoughts a whirlwind. If I help him, she mused, it would mean Vincent's failure. She couldn't bring herself to ruin his future. He was Savannah's son. Celia came from a broken home, surviving by any means necessary. But when she met Savannah, encountering a force of nature like her, it had left her awestruck. What was even more surprising was Savannah extending a hand, inviting her to join her. At the time, Celia was striving to become a martial artist. Of course, she wasn't alone in her pursuit. Her companions were Vincent's father, Finch, and his current stepmother, Vesa. She wasn't entirely sure why she agreed to join their group back then, but she ended up joining the adventure that would become legendary in Ardenka. Sometime later, she found herself facing a red ogre alongside her team. This time, I wasn't the main character, she thought, as Savannah seized the opportunity and cleaved the ogre's head clean off. Savannah was strong and beautiful, possessing a power that made others smile, a beacon of hope in Celia's life. So, on the day Savannah gave birth to her child and passed away, Celia decided to dedicate her life to protecting Savannah's son until he became a respected martial artist. However, 14 years later, after countless times reflecting on this vow, she had watched him be humiliated by his brothers. She had lost all hope in him, even questioning if she should leave Idenka. Then, one day, While observing Wilson snooping around, she discovered that Vincent had finally been acknowledged by the clan head. From that day forward, a spark of hope rekindled within her for him. Meanwhile, the Crimson Demon impassively attacked Finch. He commanded Raven, who swiftly appeared to block the Crimson Demon's assault. Wilson, the attendant, was impressed by Raven's unexpected assistance. Vincent stated that he was counting on him. Then, Vincent sat on the ground and began to meditate. Celia, terrified, thought meditating in this situation was madness. She reasoned that if he was jostled or impacted in any way, even with the Crimson Demon still focused on Raven, he would die. Raven fought with all his might to buy as much time as possible, managing to land a few blows and push the demon back slightly. Now focused on him, the Crimson Demon launched an attack, but Raven managed to defend himself. He found the Crimson Demon weaker than anticipated, but was surprised by the barrage of blows. The effects of his iron skin trait didn't work against the demon's blade. Under the demon's relentless assault, his sword began to crack, and after one particularly fierce blow, it finally shattered. The Crimson Demon now poised for a final strike. But even without his blade, Raven managed to block the demon's scythe with his bare hands. He called out to Vincent, saying he had done well so far, and, using his swordsmanship skills, he cut down the demon. Finally, the Crimson Demon was slain. Wilson asked if this had been Vincent's plan all along. She congratulated him, mentioning that his father wouldn't be pleased he'd received help, but Vincent told her not to worry. Since she had taken control of this place, a barrier had prevented any monsters from entering. Now, one demon was dead. Others would come. This conquest was merely to have Raven prove his resolve to him. Now it was Vincent's turn to demonstrate his resolve. He selected the magical crystal he had received. It replenished all his magical power. Even with his enhanced stamina, he could only use his ability twice a day. Unable to gauge the performance of the miraculous stone, he needed to meditate while another Crimson Demon attacked. He unleashed a tremendous blow with his swordsmanship skill. The Crimson Demon's core, taking the full brunt of the attack, split open. In that instant, it exposed several weak points. Vincent once again found his path with the sword. In a mere second, he defeated the Crimson Demon, leaving Celia stunned. She realized her worries had been unnecessary. He had become someone incredible. Vincent coughed up a bit of blood, but remained unwavering. Julian, curious and amazed by his technique, noted how his body was in such a state after only using it a few times. She said Vincent should rest, and that she would take him home, even if he fainted. But Vincent declared that, just like at the gathering, the last one standing was the true victor. However, something utterly bizarre occurred. A massive magical circle formed above them. Everyone was terrified. It was a summoning circle. Celia stated there was no record of such a thing happening during the rite of passage. While observing several piles of stones, what was summoned was an enormous stone serpent, or more accurately, an artifact guardian. A guardian of such immense size, having only been discovered now, suggested that it was most likely created. Along with the temple, she attempted to communicate with it, inquiring about its purpose, but received no answer, possibly due to its immense age. She ordered Raven to take Vincent away from there, as he could barely stand. She prepared to fight the creature, and shortly after, she readied her 7-star swordsmanship. She was attacked by the Guardian, and the children were terrified, believing her dead. However, the stone monster began to freeze completely from the inside out. Seeing this, Raven was astonished by the power of the 7-star technique, but Celia stated that it wasn't over yet, and launched an attack toward the pillar. They didn't know why he did that, except for Julian, who realized what he was trying to convey. As she looked at the pillar, she saw a small, insect-like gem attached to it. That was the Guardian's true form. The insect flew towards the children, but she quickly got there and cut in half. She hadn't been able to perceive the Guardian's true form, possibly due to its age, but Vincent had quickly located it and even managed to alert her while lying on the ground. Visibly exhausted, yet mustering the strength to point towards a box within the frozen rubble, possibly the treasure the Guardian was trying to protect. When she opened the box, she found the bones of a dead dragon. It seemed this relic was left by the founder of Osserlin. Julian said that the dragon skeleton was an extremely rare ingredient of immeasurable value. Celia figured this was the reason he had established the rite of passage here. She told the young master to keep the bones. Usually, the spoils of conquest belonged to the clan, and if they found out she allowed him to keep the treasure, it could bring trouble, she said. It was his due, and he could bear the consequences of his actions. He decided to cut the bone in half and give a part to her, as he couldn't have done alone. The clan head was at the ancient clan head's burial ground. Julian said that Vincent had successfully passed the rite of passage, but he said that this should be reported to the Council of Elders. Celia said that the spectacle she witnessed was so impressive that she decided to go directly to him. She said that the hostile raven of Ardenka, influenced by Vincent, risked his life taking the Crimson Demon's attack so the young master could subdue it. As expected, the clan head complained that he couldn't do it alone, but she continued, saying that after that, he defeated another Crimson Demon on his own and found the dragon bone left by the founder of Osterland. She presented the dragon bone, cut in half. So the clan head asked if he had cut the bone alone. She replied yes. The clan head said she was forgetting something and asked her to break the bone. She struck it, but nothing happened. Then, she activated her skills and struck with all her might, but the bone remained undamaged. The clan head said you have to be at least a first-rate blacksmith to damage a dragon bone. It seems his son has a special talent, and asked her to continue looking after him. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. I'll be back with the next part soon. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel here. Big hugs and goodbye.